To this day, the inhabitants of planet Earth have looked to the stars for proof of other life. But the truth isn't out there, it's in here. Since World War II, the British government has been watching us, watching the skies. Buried in the vaults of the Ministry of Defense are thousands of reports on UFO sightings, some left unexplained. But now, after decades of secrecy, the files are being released. And for the first time, the truth about Britain's UFOs is revealed. A near mid-air collision.
I can't speculate on what it was, I really can't. I mean, I don't know to this day what it was.
A World War II bomber's close encounter.
I don't talk about it too much to people, only close friends.
An unidentified object caught on radar. And new evidence on one of the most celebrated UFO cases, the Welsh Roswell.
If it could be shown that any UFOs were extraterrestrial in origin, people's entire belief system would fundamentally change.
Strange, unexplained stories that leave many wondering if there really is life out there. What are three popular word searches on the internet? Perhaps the first two are no surprise. UFOs have an incredible hold on the popular imagination, but few myths have involved government investigations, surveillance, and cover-ups. UFOs have. One person who knows just how seriously UFO sightings have been taken by the British authorities is ex-MOD operative Nick Pope.
From 1952 onwards, it was decided that there really needed to be a small unit set up permanently to research and investigate the UFO phenomenon. And really from the 50s right up until 2009, the Ministry of Defence did have a small project looking at the UFO mystery.
Pope and the UFO desk in the 90s, helping add to the thousands of files the ministry had gathered for decades.
Subject making his way.
Now that they're being released from the vaults, key UFO eyewitnesses give their side of the stories. And UFO experts, skeptics and believers interrogate just what the MOD was keeping secret. Dr. David Clark is the journalist who helped first persuade the MOD to release the files.
If you look in the files, there are thousands of unusual things peeping in the sky from right across the British Isles. There's absolutely no doubt that people see things in the sky that they can't identify. They always have done.
January 1995. Two experienced pilots of a Boeing 737 carrying 60 passengers from Milan to Manchester report a near collision. It's an incredible sighting of an unidentified flying object which sends the authorities into a spin.
In the defence files, there are quite a number of incidents involving near misses between civil aircraft and unidentified flying objects. The most impressive of all was a report that was made by the crew of a British Airways 737.
Speedbird 5061, overhead pylons 9 miles.
They were just about to enter this cloud bank, quite a clear sky, good sort of vision. Suddenly the first officer said he saw this object coming towards him like an illuminated Christmas tree. It was so low in its approach and so close that he automatically ducked, thinking there was going to be a collision. And this thing just zoomed past, and immediately he turned to the captain and said, "Did you see that?" The captain said, "Yeah, I saw it as well."
Immediately the pilots radioed into Manchester Control Tower.
There's a lot of concern amongst air crews about what damage could be done to their reputation if they became known as, you know, the crew that see flying saucers. So it was interesting in this case that despite that, these two air crew decided that when they landed they were going to file an official air miss report. So that would then trigger a full detailed investigation by the Civil Aviation Authority, which is exactly what happened.
For the first time, the MOD files show how this extraordinary incident sparked a full-scale investigation conducted by aircraft near-miss investigator Anthony Booth.
Well, it was unusual for a start because it was the only one in my memory in 7 years of working in that particular department that I'd actually dealt with something like this. We could talk to the pilots, both the pilots. We would go through looking at radar recordings, RT transcript recordings of the voices of the pilots, recordings of what Manchester Air Traffic Control had to say. We just looked at anything that might shed some light on what this object might have been.
The pilots now refuse to talk publicly about the near crash, but the MOD files recall what they told Anthony Booth at the time.
My attention was initially focused on the glare shield in front of me, but I was diverted by something in my peripheral vision. The object had a number of small white lights, rather like a Christmas tree. The high speed of the object, although unable to estimate its distance, it was very close.
There's a transcript of the conversation between the captain of the 737 and ground control.
So this is Speedbird 5061. We just had something go down the right-hand side, just above us, very fast.
And Manchester immediately come back and say, well, there's nothing seen on radar.
Was it an aircraft? Well, it had lights. He went down the starboard side very quickly.
Manchester say, and just above you?
Just slightly above us, yes.
Manchester then advised them to keep an eye out for anything, but they can't see anything at all. It must have been very fast.
So we'll go down very quickly after it passed you, I think. Okay, well, there you go.
The Manchester control tower could not find any radar signal. To radar expert Doug Robb, this is extraordinary.
It says the likelihood of such activity escaping detection is remote, as the area is well served by several radars, and any movement at the levels in question would almost certainly have generated a radar response. Nothing was seen.
So what was it that avoided radar detection? The MOD files showed that the investigators and pilots considered all the possibilities.
It was a hang glider. At night, he's suicidal.
Hang glider would not be picked up by normal radar, no.
A comet?
No, I don't think so.
A meteor could be detected on re-entry if the radar was looking exactly in the right direction as that piece of debris went past at some speed.
Military?
Maybe, but I didn't recognise it. But we're near a major airport. It would have showed up on the radar response.
Spy plane?
I don't think so. Didn't look like a stealth.
Stealth aircraft would not be picked up by normal radars. If a spy plane is being kept secret, it's not going to be flying where people can see it. And certainly nowhere near airliners.
UFO?
That'd be daft. I don't know.
These pilots are not lying. They did have an unusual experience, which to them remains baffling.
The files show the investigation seriously analysed the possibility of military activity, but they found no evidence from any official source.
It seems most unlikely that such a flight would have been conducted so close to a busy international airport.
So what was it? We revealed the conclusion, locked away in the MOD vaults since 1995, reached by Anthony Booth's investigation.
Most of the incidents that we looked at, we could arrive at some conclusion, definite conclusion, but in this case, we couldn't really. We had to come up with an assessment of cause and risk. Both the risk and the cause were unaccessible.
Degree of risk, unaccessible. Cause, unaccessible. Really, that statement is really, really unusual to find that in an official air miss report, and it's basically saying we don't have a clue what was seen.
Look, they'll say back at BA.
I think they might rib us about this one.
At the end of their the summary of the working group's discussions, it says that there is no doubt that these pilots both saw an object and that it was of sufficient significance to prompt an air miss report. Unfortunately, the nature and identity of this object remains unknown. To speculate about extraterrestrial activity, fascinating though it may be, is not within the group's remit and must be left to those whose interest lies in this field.
To some ufologists like Nick Pope, the absence of any real conclusion leaves serious and unanswered questions.
Now, to me, this was quite extraordinary. UFO does not mean alien spacecraft, but clearly, in some people's minds, whether it was the pilot and the first officer, or whether it was the investigators at the Civil Aviation Authority or the Ministry of Defence, clearly somebody was thinking, well, maybe, just maybe, this is something extraterrestrial.
I can't speculate on what it was. I really can't. I mean, I don't know to this day what it was. All I know is that we can't assume we know everything in this day and age. There may be things that we don't know about.
The Manchester near-miss investigation shows just how seriously unexplained sightings were taken by the MOD. But the UFO desk had been receiving reports from pilots for decades. The files reveal sightings during World War II, and in some cases these were considered so grave they were referred right to the top of government. The newly released UFO files confirm what many experts suspected. The British government was investigating unexplained sightings as far back as World War II.
I don't talk about it too much to people, only close friends who experienced perhaps flying during the war.
Spring 1944. Britain was engaged in heavy bombing raids over Germany. Rumours of strange, unidentified missiles were getting through to top command. Considered a threat to public morale, the MOD files reveal that the order to keep them secret came right from the top. Sightings such as the one seen by gunner Bernard Dye.
Now I have here a personal wartime diary. I'll read you an entry which I wrote on the 26th of April. Operation Essen. 300 aircraft raided Essen.
Dye then recorded the most extraordinary sight.
By unidentified objects, which I describe as just red balls of fire.
This is the first time Bernard Dye has spoken on television about what happened that night.
We left the target area and we were heading back towards Mildenhall, our base. We were heading across France. Everything appeared to be peaceful. Suddenly I saw 3 balls of fire coming up from below and reported this to our pilot, Arthur Horton, on the intercom. A few seconds afterwards, the rear gunner, Brian Harper, he observed 2 more red balls of fire. Immediately, Arthur was a bit perturbed, and were they fighters? No, not fighters, Arthur, just balls of fire coming towards us. I said to Arthur, now, evasive action, corkscrew, starboard, go, go, go. We travelled over 300 miles per hour. The aircraft was shaking like a leaf, and still they were following. The pilot was getting worried about burning the engines up. Engineer Dave, what about the engines? Never mind the engines, skipper. Keep going, or something to that effect. The words were rather rude. It certainly gave me and the crew the willies to see them. After a short distance, these 5 red objects, they just got slower, and the red lights disappeared into the blackness below, and we got safely home. Well, when we got back to Mildenhall, our base, each crew is interrogated by intelligence officers, and they just laughed at us. And this upset the pilot, and, he said, you wouldn't bloody well have been laughing if you'd have been sitting with us in the aircraft.
What did gunner Bernard Dye think they were?
Didn't know what to think, but I thought they were just a new weapon, that the Germans had invented.
Bernard Dye was not alone. Other World War II aircrew had also reported unexplained sightings, and we now know that at least one of these reports was suppressed, and the order to do so came right from the top. Wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill was so terrified the report would leak out, he ordered a 50-year blackout.
Mr. Churchill declared that the UFO incident should be immediately classified for at least 50 years, and its status reviewed by a future Prime Minister.
Churchill's order referred specifically to a late World War II sighting made by a British aircrew returning from a reconnaissance mission over Germany. The files record,
"My grandfather was present during a debate about an unexpected incident experienced by an RAF bomber crew."
The MOD files show that the story originates from the grandson of Churchill's bodyguard, who had been present at an urgent meeting between the Prime Minister and the US commander of the Allied forces, General Eisenhower, who discussed the incident together.
He was writing in to see if the ministry could confirm this story, that this guy who was the bodyguard was present at a discussion between Winston Churchill and Eisenhower about a mysterious incident when the crew of a Royal Air Force reconnaissance aircraft that had seen this metallic object that had appeared by the side of their aircraft, and it followed the aircraft, and it behaved in a way that was completely unexplainable in terms of it being, you know, a German aircraft or any other sort of Nazi flying machine that they were aware of.
A leading aircraft expert was also at the meeting.
He dismissed any possibility that it could be a missile, since a missile could not suddenly match its speed with a slower aircraft and then accelerate again.
Churchill was determined this would go no further.
Another person at the meeting raised the possibility of an unidentified flying object, at which point Mr. Churchill declared that the incident should be immediately classified.
But the file goes further. One extraordinary line explains just how fearful Churchill was of public reaction to this UFO sighting, if it ever got out.
This event should be immediately classified, since it would create mass panic amongst the general population and destroy one's belief in the church.
But the files also reveal that this wasn't the first time Churchill had got embroiled in UFO sightings.
In October 1912, there was sightings of mysterious lights in the sky over the dockyards at Sheerness in Essex. Winston Churchill was the First Lord of the Admiralty, and he had to look into this, and Churchill had to admit in Parliament that he couldn't explain what had been seen.
The files show that even after the war, Churchill took a personal interest in unexplained sightings.
In the aftermath of the sightings in Washington, D.C. in 1952, that made all the news headlines, Winston Churchill again became interested and sent a memo to the Secretary of State for Air. What does all this stuff about flying saucers amount to? What can it mean? What is the truth? Let me have a report at your convenience.
Until now, Gunner Bernard Dye never knew there were other World War II sightings that Churchill wanted kept secret at such a critical time in the war. We showed him the newly released MOD file on Churchill.
Well, after reading this report, it sounds, you know, really identical to what we witnessed and saw that night. I haven't heard of this before, but it doesn't surprise me that he was told about it, because things happened during the war years, and there were other objects obviously appeared.
It's interesting that during the 1940s there were a very large number of sightings reported by aircrew, and there are various Royal Air Force files at the National Archives that detail some of these reports. Rocket phenomena they were described as, but they were never able to explain them. And at the end of the war, when they debriefed some of the Luftwaffe pilots, they said that they'd seen very similar things themselves, and they thought they were Allied secret weapons.
So is there an explanation as to what the aircrew saw? Dave Clark has his own theory.
They just thought that it was a combination of misperception on part of the aircrew. They were expecting enemy action because they were so charged up on adrenaline.
UFO or not, the files show that the World War II leaders were desperate to keep such sightings away from the public. The next file reveals how, even decades later, the government was still panicking about UFOs. Many UFO experts believe that the Pitlochry file illustrates one of the most significant UFO conspiracies of recent times. It involves photographs of an unidentified object captured flying over a remote Scottish valley. The photos were sent to the MOD, but mysteriously went missing. Journalist Mark Pilkington has spent years trying to track down these UFO images.
The Pitlochry photographs in the MOD files date back to the 4th of August 1990, when two witnesses on the A9 near Calvine, near Pitlochry, allegedly saw a large diamond-shaped craft hovering in the air for about 10 minutes and took 6 photographs of it. And the object that they claimed to have seen was accompanied by 2 aircraft, which the MOD later identified as Harriers.
The photographer has never been identified. He sent the 6 photographs to the Scottish Daily Record newspaper. The paper never ran the story. Instead, they referred them to the MOD for investigation.
The Ministry of Defence took their own copies of the photographs, which have since disappeared. They, according to the files, sent the original negatives back to the Scottish Daily Record, which inexplicably never ran a story on the subject and never published the photographs, and presumably returned them to the 2 men whose names have been removed from the file, so we can't ask the 2 men. So mystery piled upon mystery.
All that remains in the files is a photocopy of the alleged photographs. UFOlogists later mocked up this photo of what was seen. But Nick Pope dealt with the original photos and file when he worked behind the MOD desk.
Both the Defence Intelligence Staff and the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre analysed this very carefully, and the consensus was clear on this. This was a real object. It was maybe 25, 30 metres in diameter. I sat down with my opposite number from the Defence Intelligence Staff at a briefing about UFOs. We discussed this photograph extensively. This was something that was of defence interest, because clearly it could do something that we couldn't, and we wanted that technology.
The MOD was determined to play down the incident.
There's an interesting briefing by the Ministry of Defence press office on defensive lines to take if these photographs made it into the newspapers, and they were asked questions about this. And there's a list that basically says that we have looked at the photographs and no definitive conclusions have been reached regarding the large diamond-shaped object. And if they were pressed by the media, they were told to say all sighting reports received by the Ministry are referred to the staff in the departments which are responsible for the air defence of the UK.
During his time with the Ministry, Pope had a blown-up copy of the photograph on his office wall until it was personally taken down by his superior.
One suggestion was that this was a secret prototype American spy plane. My head of division convinced himself that this probably was some secret aircraft or drone, and he ordered that this be removed.
We know from the files that there was a lot of internal discussion about, were the Americans flying this incredible spy plane, and if so, why had they not asked for permission, for this thing to fly through British airspace?
Journalist Mark Pilkington believes that events at the time could well have influenced what people thought they had seen.
This was just 2 days after the first Gulf War had broken out, and there were certainly great deployments of aircraft towards the Middle East, and the UK was a kind of sort of stop-off point and a sort of launch pad for a lot of those aircraft.
The MOD were clearly worried about public reaction, just as Churchill had been 4 decades earlier. So was there a cover-up by the MOD over the mysterious Pitlochry photographs?
There's a possibility that the Ministry of Defence destroyed these images, possibly because they thought that they were some American spy plane that they'd rather we didn't know about, or maybe if this thing genuinely remained unexplained, because we simply didn't want the embarrassment of saying that there might be things in our airspace with speeds and manoeuvres that exceed everything that we've got, and yet which remain unexplained.
However, all we're basing this on, we should make clear, is a very grainy, fuzzy black and white image that, for all I know, could have been drawn by a child with crayons.
Mark Pilkington is still looking for the real Pitlochry photographs to find out just what did put Britain's defences to the test. But 6 years later, on Britain's east coast, another UFO sighting sparks off a full-scale military investigation and a direct challenge to the Secretary of State for Defence. In 1996, the Ministry of Defence was drawn into a serious breach of UK defences by a UFO over East Anglia. MOD files reveal it not only involved the police, Coast Guard and RAF, but a call to the Defence Secretary to scramble jet fighters.
I'm very concerned about an incident that occurred off the East Anglian coast recently involving a visual unidentified flying craft sighting that was correlated by various different military radar systems. Why weren't our jets scrambled?
It was one of the biggest UFO scares ever. And it all started one quiet October night on the East Coast.
It was the police officers, actually, who phoned in the first reports. There's an extract from that. In the early hours of the morning, the police are saying we can see a red and green rotating light in the sky directly southeast from Skegness. It looks to be high in the sky directly over the Wash.
The patrol officers reported the sighting to the station sergeant.
I immediately phoned it through to the Skegness control room, who relayed it onto Great Yarmouth Coast Guard Maritime Rescue, suspecting it might be an incident over the sea.
We had a report at about 3:15 local time from Skegness Police, and they could actually see this light in a southeasterly direction. We were uncertain of what it was at the time, and we immediately made a report to the local air defence radars to see if they could see anything.
The call went through to RAF Neatishead, the most important air defence centre in southern England.
Planetary radar has a contact bearing at 221 degrees at...
They noticed that on one of the radars, a blip that they couldn't identify, that wasn't an aircraft.
Could the mysterious radar blip and the strange lights seen by the police be the same thing? Panic calls from the public started to come in.
No, I don't think they're invading.
A call was put out to shipping to keep a lookout for unidentified lights. Then a tanker came back.
The vessel at sea was the Connor Coast, and she was in much this sort of area.
At 3:50 a.m., Patrol Officer P.C. Leyland rushed onto the police station roof to video the strange lights and managed to capture 5 minutes of footage, now showing a single stationary white light. News of the sighting spread quickly through the UFO grapevine.
The transcript of the conversation between the Coast Guard and the police and the trawler crew was leaked to the local news, and it suddenly became this huge UFO incident that got to the attention of the local MP.
The sighting gathered such momentum, even local Labour MP Martin Redmond got embroiled and started asking difficult questions.
Martin Redmond said, look, you've got police officers seeing UFOs, you've got Royal Air Force officers tracking them on radar, and yet you don't even get the aircraft in the air to take a look at this thing.
Here's a copy of the letter that Martin Redmond MP sent to the Right Honourable Michael Portillo, Secretary of State for Defence, and he says, I'm very concerned about an incident that occurred off the East Anglian coast recently involving a visual unidentified flying craft sighting, which was correlated by various different military radar systems. While I'm interested in finding out what was seen, my primary concern stems from the absolute shambles that such an event seemed to cause. So he's really sort of having a go at the Ministry of Defence and saying, you know, why didn't you react to this? What are the RAF doing? So this really stung the RAF.
The files reveal a picture of chaos. The letter sparked off an MOD investigation to explain the RAF's resistance. Doug Robb was operations manager on the night. We showed him the MOD findings. He wasn't surprised by the conclusions.
This diagram is the radar plots over Boston on that night. And in summary, it shows that Claxby picked up the object, but it didn't move, and it was on land. And after investigation, it was decided that it was the church tower, the Boston Stump, as it's known.
The files were certain this was the culprit.
The church is known in aviation circles as the Boston Stump, and appears occasionally on some radars in certain radar propagation conditions.
They said that this was a completely separate phenomenon to the bright stationary lights that had been seen by the police from Boston and Skegness and by the tanker crew.
The report concluded there was no justification to order the scramble of RAF fighters, much to the chagrin of the local MP, Martin Redmond.
You'd scramble for a high-speed incoming aircraft 200 miles away, but you're not going to scramble aircraft for a fixed object on land. I mean, what's the threat?
If what the radar picked up was indeed a church, what then were the mysterious lights seen by the police and the tanker crew? The MOD scrutinized the police video footage.
It suggests a distant celestial source.
The MOD sent the footage onto the Royal Greenwich Observatory for analysis. Their report has been kept buried since 1996 in the MOD files. UFO and astronomy expert Ian Ridpath was shown their conclusions and the police video.
If you look at the police video, you can see it's just a bright dot of light just sitting there, not appearing to do anything. So, to me, this shows that even the most impeccable witnesses can actually make what is really a basic mistake, which is just misidentifying bright celestial objects. Well, the most common culprit is the planet Venus. In fact, it's called the queen of the UFOs, and this is because it's the brightest object in the night sky after the sun and the moon, which could have been what the police were seeing.
He also believes there's an explanation for the colours of the lights.
When the camera zooms in, very often the camera will completely lose focus, and you can actually see some odd shape to the light, which is actually the diaphragm of the camera.
But this doesn't explain what the tanker crew observed. The MOD investigation found that they saw a light coming from a different direction to Venus, and they were baffled.
These lights remain unexplained.
But expert Ian Ridpath believes there is an answer.
The object that the tanker saw to the north, I think, was another bright star called Vega, which is also just appearing to twinkle and flash multicolored lights.
UFO expert and skeptic Dave Clark believes there is a reason why this escalated into such a major incident.
This happened in 1996, which was the very height of the popularity of the X-Files series on TV. It was the biggest sort of year, the 1996-97, in terms of number of reports they received since 1978.
So is this case closed for East Anglia? Or will more mystery emerge, just as it has, with one of Britain's most celebrated cases that refuses to go away, the Welsh Roswell? In 1974, in North Wales, thousands of people experienced a violent earth tremor and lights were seen falling from the sky. Some ufologists believe a UFO crashed, and there's been a cover-up ever since of the Welsh Roswell.
Oh, a heck of a bang, yes. Oh, yes, it's like a tremor. It was in the house, shook the houses. We're in new houses.
And it seemed to come right on top of their head until the house is coming down.
There were lights coming from the top of the mountain, just up over there.
24th of January 1974 at 21:50 GMT. 5 bodies spectacularly incandescent were observed traversing the sky.
New information has been revealed that opens the mystery further. Named as one of the main witnesses in the Berwyn incident is Hugh Lloyd, then a 14-year-old farmer's son. Just after 8:30 p.m., Hugh's family felt the massive earth tremor. It was a frightening experience. Almost 40 years on, Hugh still remembers that day as if it were yesterday.
It was like this thud, and straight away the whole place started shaking very violently. The light flickered and the lights in the picture on television was snow on the screen. But we were all frightened. We didn't have a clue what it was. And Enoch said it must be an explosion. And then the phone started ringing. Hello? Like neighbours, phoning to ask, did you feel that? And then roughly about 20 minutes, there was a knock on the door. And there was a police officer there. And he said, we've had reports there's a plane crash that's come down on the Berwyn. And we'd like to commandeer your Land Rover to go up there. Me being 14, I said, well, Enoch, you better drive it. We carried on up the mountain about half a mile, maybe 3/4. We drove up the track and we stopped, got out and got torches, and it was very quiet and very dark, but, nothing to be seen.
How are we going with the torch?
One of them said, there's nothing here. It's too quiet. Can't see anything. You might as well go down. So we turned back to the vehicles, and as we were approaching the vehicles, we saw this very bright white light. Up the valley. Just behind those trees there, up to the left in the valley between those two mountains. A very bright white light, coming up from the ground, pointing upwards. But it was, very, very bright. I knew it was coming from the ground, but we couldn't actually see the source of the light because it was, in the valley itself, being hidden. The light didn't look like a plane crash. It was too white for a fire. It didn't last for very long. 20 seconds at the most.
They searched the mountainside, but there was no sign of a crash. So what was the light? Ufologist Andy Roberts has researched the Berwyn UFO for years. Although a skeptic, he admits there is a central mystery to the incident involving another key witness.
A village nearby called Llanderfel, there was a district nurse called Pat Evans. She felt the explosion there, and because she was a nurse and had all the medical equipment, thought if a plane's crashed, I could get up there and give much-needed help until the emergency services arrived.
Pat Evans was with her 2 teenage daughters, 4 miles from Hugh Lloyd when the earth tremor hit.
So she picked up her 2 young daughters, got them in the car, drove the 10-15 minute drive up onto the B4391 road, expecting to see an aircraft crashed and in flames.
This is the road that she was driving on, and it's a road that she knew very well, so she had no problems driving up here at night. And obviously she was out there looking for what she thought was going to be a plane disaster. And just as she came out from the other side of this copse of trees, she was absolutely astonished to see far across the hills to the left a huge ball of red, white, orange, pulsating light.
Whatever the object was, it was too far from the road to be reached on foot. Pat and her daughters watched, astounded at the ball of light, slowly pulsating and changing colour.
She described it as being half the size of the moon, and around this object were moving torchlights and vehicle lights. She realised that it clearly wasn't a crashed aircraft and that someone or some people were there attending to whatever it was, and realising that, she drove back home and went to bed, and to this day is completely mystified by what it was.
So what did Pat Evans and Hugh Lloyd see that night? We reveal that even the arrival of the mysterious men in black couldn't provide all the answers. The unidentified sightings by Pat Evans and Hugh Lloyd in Berwyn, Wales in 1974 have gone down in UFO folklore. The recently released MOD files have added even more mystery. Researchers from the British Geological Survey were quickly dispatched to Berwyn to investigate an earth tremor that had registered 3.5 on the Richter scale.
Immediately after the earthquake, we were getting a lot of reports, some of them rather complex ones about lights in the sky, lights on the hill. So I brought a small team of people down to ask the local people around here what they'd seen, what they'd heard, what they'd felt.
The British Geological Survey team have become known in Berwyn legend as the Men in Black, as they were dressed in dark suits, official-looking, and were going door to door.
Some people seemed to think the whole event was rather suspicious, and that we, simple scientists from the Geological Survey, had something to do with suspicious events around here.
Files containing Chris's notes recall his interview with nurse Pat Evans, who saw the unidentified light.
I have here the notes that I made when I talked to Pat Evans. She felt the shaking, but also she was very concerned about lights that she saw in the sky. She thought there was a big red light, like a glowing red fire. This is a copy of one of the maps that we, with our team, used when we were going around the area talking to people, and we were able, therefore, to put on the map exactly where we got that interview from, and therefore exactly what that person saw, heard and felt.
This British Geological Survey map, buried in the vaults, is a revelation. It shows the anomalous lights seen by Pat Evans and Hugh Lloyd both appeared in the same small area of hillside at the same time. UFologist Andy Roberts returns to the same spot on the mountainside where Pat and her daughter saw the UFO, and where Pat Evans told her story to Andy Roberts in 1998.
When I brought Pat Evans up onto this mountain road in 1998 and she told me her story then, I photographed her, and the photograph that I took showed her pointing to where she saw what she saw in 1974, and judging by this photograph she was pointing over there, and which we know is where the police and farmers were searching that night.
Pat Evans was on the Llanganug to Welshpool Road, which is just, well, they just beyond the forestry there. So if she was there, she probably saw the same light as we saw. You know, because it's dead in line. I'm nearly positive that's the same light as she saw.
The recent files show the MOD's explanation for the sudden explosion and mysterious lights.
Subsequent search of the hillsides in question revealed no sign of impact, however. The Meteorological Office considered that these sightings could have been occasioned by a bolide, that is to say a meteor which enters the Earth's atmosphere and burns up before reaching the ground. A private investigation done on behalf of the British Astronomical Society concluded, however, that the meteor may in fact have disintegrated over Manchester, and that its appearance was preceded at 8:30 p.m. by an earth tremor in the Berwyn Mountains with which it has no connection. So they were saying again, these are two things that happened coincidentally on the same night. You've got a meteor burning up in the atmosphere, and also you've got an earth tremor.
So is this incredible coincidence, two separate natural phenomena, a meteor shower and an earthquake happening simultaneously, in itself a complete answer to the mystery? Many UFO believers think not. They believe the files failed to answer the big question, what was the source of light Pat Evans and Hugh Lloyd saw on the ground?
So what Pat saw is an absolute mystery. I don't think it's a UFO for a minute, although it is an unidentified something. It appeared to be on the ground. If anything, it's an unidentified grounded object. But it's a mystery. So in and amongst all the hype about aliens and extraterrestrial crashing, in amongst the truth and the fact about an earthquake and bolide meteors, what we have is a mysterious sighting of a stationary, large, glowing object on the ground for at least 10 minutes.
So is this case closed for Berwyn? There are still many unanswered questions.
The Berwyn Mountain incident is, I think in many people's minds, it's not case closed. Some people believe that the release of these files is itself disinformation, and that the Ministry of Defence is still...
display different coloured lights that were blinking on and off.
Alarmed, the men speed back to the gate to call the flight desk from a secure phone line. They do not want to broadcast the information over their radios. At Burroughs' insistence, the call is transferred to the base's Central Security Control, or CSC. The shift commander dispatches 26-year-old Sergeant Jim Peniston to the site. Peniston has been a security policeman with the Air Force for 7 years.
They told me I need to go out the East Gate. We have a situation out there. I said, what type of situation? He said, well, I'd rather have the on-scene patrolman tell you what that is. And I says, well, can I wait? No, you gotta get out immediately.
Within minutes, Peniston and his driver arrive at the East Gate. Burroughs and Stevens direct his attention to the woods.
I seen this multicolor, yellow and red It was about, 200-300 meters away. And it looked like an aircraft crash immediately. That's the color that you get from titanium and fuel burning.
Peniston calls back to CSC and gets clearance to investigate a possible downed aircraft.
If it is an aircraft crash, we can go ahead and, render assistance and set up security for it.
As part of standard procedure, Sergeant Peniston tries to gather information from Bud Stevens.
And I said, well, do you hear it crash, Bud? He said, no, it didn't crash. It landed.
Stevens is too frightened to help with the investigation. He returns to his post, while Burroughs and Peniston proceed without him. Soon after, they speed off with a driver and head toward the mysterious light. When they can no longer maneuver the vehicle around the dense trees, Burroughs and Peniston proceed on foot. They walk about 50 meters and notice strong interference on their radios.
The farther we got into the woods, it became more and more intermediate, where it was harder and harder to talk to him.
Suddenly, Sergeant Peniston feels an electrical charge in the air.
I've been in excitable situations before on duty, and I know the adrenaline feeling, but this here was different. You could feel it on your clothes, your face, your hair.
The closer they move toward the light, the less the scene resembles a crash.
Didn't have no smell of smoke, and it was too contained. It was just like one ball out there.
And we came into a clearing, and then that's when it was like a bright light lit up. The whole area was almost blinding.
Sergeant Peniston moves within 10 feet of the object, and the bright light dims. As his eyes adjust, he has trouble understanding what he's seeing.
I'm a rational person. I wanted a rational explanation of what was going on. I could not come up with one.
Peniston snaps pictures with his military-issued camera.
The craft was triangular in shape and measured probably 9 feet wide by about 8 feet high. I couldn't tell the front or back to it. I mean, there was no engines on one side or no cockpit or nothing like that. It was all completely smooth, the outside of the craft.
He then circles the object, writing descriptions in a notepad. These are the notes he wrote that night.
Surface is unknown. Identity unknown. No apparent landing gear present. No sound, but appears to be operating somehow.
Peniston's handwriting changes dramatically as he gets closer to the craft.
I was really having problems with the type of craft. I keep saying it's unknown. I have a problem with understanding what I'm recording here.
When he draws near enough, he reaches out and touches the object.
The fabric of the craft was smooth, like glass. It was warm to the touch, but not hot. There wasn't like lights on it. Somehow it was in the fabric of the craft.
On the front side of the object, Peniston notices several strange symbols. He copies them in his notebook as well.
They were like markings, not numbers, not language. There were several, maybe 6 symbols measuring 3 feet wide. I wasn't trained for what I was experiencing.
Suddenly, the object emits a blinding flash of light. The men take cover.
Then the object, whatever it was, lifted up, went up, and then moved back away over the trees.
The speed of the craft leaving the area was, the best way to describe it is probably in a blink of an eye. I've never seen any craft move that fast in my entire Air Force career, and I don't think I ever will again.
As the men slowly rise to their feet, their attention is drawn by another flash of light through the trees. At first they assume it is the craft, but on second glance they realize it is the Orford Ness Lighthouse, 5 miles away. Burroughs and Peniston check their radios. They're working again. It is now around 5 a.m., roughly 2 hours since they first spotted the mysterious lights in the woods. They contact the CSC, and their commander orders them to rendezvous with a security team back at the East Gate.
So we were like, what are we going to say? We can't explain what we saw. We can't explain what just happened.
Later that morning, the men are brought in for debriefing. Peniston is reluctant to divulge everything he witnessed.
It was not a good career move to report exactly what we seen. I went into the shift commander's office with Burroughs, and we gave a sanitized briefing of what happened that night.
After the debriefing, Peniston says the shift commander issues him a thinly veiled warning.
Gentlemen, he says, Project Blue Book ended in 1969, and sometimes things are best left alone.
Project Blue Book was the code name for the U.S. Air Force's controversial UFO investigation unit.
During the course of our investigation,
before it was disbanded, its goal was to determine if UFOs were a potential threat to national security. Despite his commander's warning, Sergeant Peniston can't put the strange encounter out of his mind.
I got back to my house and I couldn't go to sleep. I'd probably sat around the house for maybe 2 or 3 hours. And finally I said, well, I got to go back out there.
He returns to the site with some plaster of Paris. His plan? To make casts of any indentations left by the craft.
I wasn't going to leave there until I had answers. I wanted something tangible.
He spots 3 round impressions in a symmetrical pattern on the ground. They are a few inches deep and roughly 10 feet apart.
They measured exactly the same distance apart, each of the pods, approximately 2 to 3 inches thick.
These are the casts made by Peniston the morning after his sighting. He believes they show the marks left by the craft when it landed on the forest floor. He decides not to show them to his superiors. Along with his notes and roll of film, the sergeant now has the 3 plaster molds to help back up his story. But Peniston's physical evidence doesn't solve the mystery of Rendlesham. Just 2 nights later, the UFO returns. And this time, the deputy base commander makes a chilling record of his own encounter.
I'm observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
Late December 1980. Sightings of a mysterious craft at the Woodbridge Bentwaters NATO complex in Suffolk, England, have put many airmen on edge. The strange encounters began the night of the 25th, when airmen reported seeing unusual lights. By the early morning hours of the 26th, 2 men claimed to have come within a few feet of a landed craft in the neighboring forest. It's now the evening of the 27th. 40-year-old Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt attends a holiday party at the Officers Club. His celebration is cut short when one of his men arrives looking distressed.
He showed up just white as a sheet. And he wasn't the type of person to get too excited too easily. He was a former Marine. He said, "It's back." We looked at each other and said, "What's back?" He said, "The UFO."
After 2 nights of disturbing stories, Holt decides to investigate for himself.
The police were spending more time looking in the sky than they were at the airplanes they were supposed to be protecting. It's time to put this to rest.
Holt instructs a 3-man security team to assemble their gear and meet him at his quarters. Within minutes, they head toward the Rendlesham forest. By the time Holt arrives, a security cordon has been established around the perimeter of the woods. Holt is briefed on the situation and is told that the UFO is no longer visible. But the men are experiencing mysterious outages in their high-powered floodlights, called light-alls. Holt and his team collect their gear, a still camera, a Geiger counter for measuring radiation, and a night vision device called a starscope.
I took my small personal cassette recorder, which I carry just about everywhere with me, just to record the events.
The team heads into the dark woods.
And I was going to investigate and show that there was definitely a good reasonable explanation for everything.
The following is the recording Holt made that night.
150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point. Heavy lift car can't get the light all to work. Seems to be some kind of mechanical problem.
Along with the malfunctioning light-alls, Holt's team encounters the same radio interference experienced by Burroughs and Penniston 2 nights prior. They are walking through the area where Burroughs and Penniston reported seeing the unidentified craft, when Holt notices gashes in the bark of several trees. It looks as if they have been struck by a large object. Holt orders one of his men to take photographs.
He took pictures of the indentations of the trees and everything. He was taking snap, snap, snap all the time.
The Geiger counter begins registering high levels of radiation, but only in the areas surrounding the alleged landing site.
There's any rings on the tree you're taking samples from on the side facing the suspected landing site? 4 clicks max. Up to 4. Interesting. That's right where you're taking the sample now. 4. That's the strongest point on the tree? Yes, sir. If you come to the back, there's no clicks whatsoever.
Suddenly, the dark woods are alive with sound.
We're getting very strange sounds out of the farmers' barnyard animals. They're very, very active, making an awful lot of noise.
All the animals in the forest were acting up, making a lot of noise. And the barnyard animals from the farm, which was on the adjacent side of the particular location, were also acting up.
One of his men points out a glowing light in the distance. With his tape recorder rolling, Holt documents every moment of this encounter.
You just saw a light there. Where? Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flash right there. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir.
We saw this bright red glowing object. It looked like an eye. It's the best way I can describe it. It was bright red, had a dark center, and appeared like as though it were winking.
We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a bit this way. Yes, it's brighter than it has been. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
It was moving through the trees, horizontally, but also traveling vertically. In other words, it was zigzagging through the trees and dripping what appeared to be, the best way I can describe it, as molten metal.
Holt and his men pursue the object into a nearby field.
As we approached, it receded. It went away from us and went out into the farmer's field. It stayed there for probably 20, 30 seconds, maybe a little more.
There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
And then it silently exploded and broke into multiple white objects. So we went into the field and searched around on the ground looking for burnt marks or evidence of whatever was coming off the object.
The men find nothing in the field. Overhead, the object makes a sudden turn.
It approached us at very, very high speed.
Oh, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now.
It stopped overhead and sent down a beam. The best way I can describe it is like a laser beam.
Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
It was a steady, constant beam as far as the diameter. It fell at our feet, and we all just went in awe. And I thought, was it trying to signal? Is it trying to warn us? Is it threatening us? And just as suddenly as it appeared, the light went click and was off.
The object speeds away. The team watches, mesmerized, as it moves over the base and continues to beam lights to the ground. To some, it appears that the light is beaming directly into the base's weapons storage area, where nuclear missiles are reportedly housed.
There's one object still hovering over Woodbridge Base at about 5 to 10 degrees off the horizon, still moving erratic and similar lights and beaming down this area.
At this point, Holt's recorder runs out of tape. A craft is still hovering in the distance, but Holt and his team aren't sure what to do next. There's no protocol for what they've just encountered. Unnerved and exhausted, the men head back to base. Airman Airman John Burroughs, who had witnessed a UFO 2 nights earlier, arrives at the site, along with Sergeant Adrian Bustinza. Burroughs is immediately concerned by the behavior of the men returning from the field.
They were kind of, I don't know, they were weird. I mean, they were upset.
After a brief conversation, Burroughs spots a blue light glowing in the same clearing Holt has just examined. The airman is determined to investigate further.
I was bugging him, come on, Colonel, let me go out and see. You know what I mean? I want to see what it is. So he finally authorized myself and Bustinza to go forward just to get a closer look.
The men head toward the strange blue glow in the field. Adrenaline quickly takes over, and Burroughs breaks into a run.
As I was getting close to whatever it was, all of a sudden it was gone.
The field is thrown into darkness, leaving the airmen scared and confounded.
It just was gone. And I'm standing out in the field, and there's nothing.
Burroughs turns to Bustinza in disbelief.
And he goes, what happened to you? And I go, I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, and you were like involved in the lights. He said, you were just like, it was like all of a sudden you were there and then you were in the lights and you were gone.
Burroughs and Bustinza return to base. Burroughs' second encounter with the bizarre lights leaves him with nothing but questions. They are unaware that a sweeping investigation involving covert government agencies is already underway. The men claim that as they headed back to the base that night, they were walking into a government conspiracy. January 1981. Rumors are swirling around the Woodbridge Bentwaters air bases in eastern England after mysterious UFOs are sighted by the U.S. Air Force personnel stationed there.
Many of them were some years into their tour of duty. These were highly trained witnesses. It's not as if they'd all just turned up there the night before.
The military investigation that followed remains controversial to this day. Those who say they witnessed the UFOs believe the military was more interested in damage control than in finding the truth.
What our government did in the name of secrecy to these individuals is absolutely shameful.
According to these airmen, they soon became unwilling participants in a government cover-up. Initially, the investigation follows standard military procedure. Deputy Base Commander Charles Holt, a witness himself, begins debriefing the airmen who reported seeing the craft.
I had no choice. I couldn't ignore it. There were so many witnesses and so many people at so many different places.
John Burroughs, who witnessed the UFOs on both nights, says his interview is clear-cut.
We took our statements, kind of looked at them, said it was really a wild thing, and there's really no explanation for what's going on, and that's how it was kind of left.
Others, like Sergeant Jim Peniston, say that after their meeting with Holt, a long and disturbing process begins. 2 weeks after his initial interview, Peniston is called for another debriefing. This time, it is with a high-ranking team of investigators, the OSI.
The OSI is the Office of Special Investigations. It's, how shall I say, the discreet police is one way to put it.
And they are there to police the US Air Force. And they can actually walk into an office of a general and, you know, even arrest him, if you like. That's how powerful they are.
When Peniston enters the room, the mood is ominous. He begins to give a statement and offers the investigators sketches and notes of his encounter. According to Peniston, the rest of the interview is a blur. To this day, he has a difficult time recalling precisely what tactics the OSI used to extract his information.
They took extra steps to make sure I was telling the truth. Sodium pentothal. I'm sure I gave a release for that. And hope that they understood that everything I said was the truth. I believe I gave my permission for that, I would think.
To Peniston, the military's investigation takes on a sinister tone as more men are called in for questioning. Shortly after the event, Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, who had accompanied John Burroughs to the field, is led to a room beneath the base for questioning. Even now, Bustinza refuses to speak publicly about the events of that night. According to author Georgina Bruni, he later confided in her.
They said to him, look, you know, what you saw was a light from the local lighthouse. And he said, no, I saw much more than that. It was more than that. No, you don't get the picture, do you? And they would not let him go until he agreed that what he saw was the lighthouse. And the moment they said to him, bullets are cheap, a dime a dozen, is when he said, okay, it was the lighthouse.
Other witnesses also say they are told to drop their stories about seeing a UFO.
We were told that we couldn't talk about it, was to treat it as top secret, and that was it. We never talked about it.
According to Airman Burroughs, the signs of a government cover-up are obvious. Shortly after his interrogation, Burroughs is back on guard duty. As he makes his rounds, he can see that the woods are bustling with activity.
There was vehicles leaving Woodbridge going out to the forest. There was helicopters flying around out there, so there was some stuff going on out there. Exactly what, I don't know.
Deputy Base Commander Charles Holt is also aware of covert activities going on at the base.
I heard some stories that were substantiated by several people that a plane load of people did come in a day or so later and did do a lot of investigating.
Peniston and Holt claim they took pictures of the mysterious craft they encountered. But when the prints return from the base's photo lab, they are blank.
The pictures are whited out, most of them. I thought that was really unusual, and I believe that the photos that I got were intentionally just whited out photographs. That's what I believe.
Even Lieutenant Colonel Holt, the highest-ranking eyewitness, believes he is being kept in the dark by the military. As the investigation continues, he's asked to type up a memo based on his interviews with other witnesses and submit it to his superiors. Holt's understanding is that the document will be shared with the British government. Holt does as he is told and submits a memo entitled Unexplained Lights. He writes, the individuals reported seeing a strange glowing object in the forest. The object was described as being metallic in appearance and triangular in shape. It is not a definitive report. Many of the details are missing or incorrect, and the descriptions at times are vague.
The memo was not meant for public consumption. It was meant as a tickler, if you will, to the Ministry of Defense to get them involved to do a proper investigation.
His superiors filed the memo away, and the strange lights never returned to the base. Eventually, rumors of an extraterrestrial craft die down. For 3 years, the public is kept in the dark about what happened at the air bases. Then, in 1983, a new witness surfaces with a startling claim about the UFO encounter, one that will only deepen the mystery of Rendlesham. October 2nd, 1983. The British Sunday tabloid News of the World hits newsstands with the headline, UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official. The article claims that a mysterious craft, moving under intelligent control, invaded the skies above the Woodbridge-Bentwaters air bases in late December 1980. But most intriguing is the offering of a piece of written evidence. An official U.S. Air Force memo confirming the alleged sightings. The document was written by one of the men who encountered the mysterious object, Deputy Base Commander Charles Holt.
Every local radio, TV station, Japanese TV, German TV, I had people swarming all over the place wanting to know the real story.
From there onwards, every single newspaper in the United Kingdom was featuring this story for about a week.
The memo, titled Unexplained Lights, offers a brief description of the late December encounters. It includes Jim Peniston's description of a strange object that maneuvered through the trees, as well as Holt's account of a red sun-like object in the night sky. But how was the story leaked to the public? The document, known as the Halt Memo, was brought to light by Larry Warren, a former Air Force security policeman at Bentwaters. He's blunt when he explains why he did it.
I wanted to drag people right by their hair through the thing and say, this happened.
He was the one who brought this whole thing to public attention. It was his information specifically that resulted in a Freedom of Information Act that resulted in the release of the so-called HALT document. And once that single sheet of paper was out, the toothpaste was out of the tube.
Warren has received both praise and criticism for his candidness. The story he tells begins like the others, but the ending is even more bizarre. In late 1980, Warren was a 19-year-old security policeman stationed at Bentwaters. According to Warren, after midnight on December 29th, he is removed from his post and ordered to the woods to assist with Colonel Halt's investigation. When he reaches a clearing, he sees a group of military personnel surrounding a glowing object.
In this field was this object on the ground. It's like a science fiction movie, but there was something alive associated with it. Didn't come out any doors. There were no windows. It was this thing, and it was changing all the time.
As he draws within a few feet of the craft, Warren says he witnesses an amazing sight. There are officers and airmen facing the object, and 3 small glowing entities standing in the light.
What he observes and the other men observe that are in proximity is 3 humanoid shapes.
There was something separate from it with these 3, what you would perceive as kids.
Warren then watches as a senior officer begins communicating with the beings.
The senior people there seemed to be following like a protocol. It seemed to be there was a procedure.
Warren is then pulled from the clearing. He's given no explanation for what he's just seen. The next day, he says he is brought into a room with other witnesses for debriefing. He remembers a film projector and 3 men in suits.
They showed us the different films of UFO military activity going back probably, I don't know, the 40s.
Like other witnesses, Warren says the more he is questioned, the more distorted his memories become. He remembers what happens next as a series of scenes that make little sense. Warren recalls being taken against his will by men in dark suits, then being led to an underground facility on the base.
I remember being on a table and people talking to me and, you know, doctors and Air Force people behind them. I have another memory of being in a kind of like a mess hall and trying to eat something and kind of being alone at a table. It's imagery. I mean, this could all have been plugged into my head.
Warren says he isn't sure if what he remembers is real, or if these images were planted by military investigators in order to confuse him and distract him from what really occurred. After the Rendlesham story breaks, Warren's accusations infuriate other witnesses. These airmen and officers say they too want the truth revealed, but that Warren's story is anything but.
It hurt the whole incident as far as this is something really did happen to us, but there's no way, the way he was describing it, what happened to us, and it wasn't fair to the people that were involved to have that kind of extreme stuff come out.
Parts of his story do correspond with other eyewitness accounts. Warren, like Charles Halt and Jim Peniston, recalls seeing a glowing craft in the clearing of the Rendlesham Woods shortly after Christmas 1980. But Larry Warren is the only airman who claims he saw alien life forms. Another problem with Warren's version of events is that no one can remember seeing him in the woods on the night in question.
Nobody ever recalls him being out there that night. Nobody I've talked to all the players and just about everybody that was on the, even the fringes, and nobody remembers seeing Larry Warren anywhere except around the base in training.
Warren remains steadfast in his convictions.
I've never lost a minute's sleep over my role in this. I've never intentionally misrepresented anything, lied, or tried to gain anything unfairly.
The contradictions surrounding the Rendlesham case have proven frustrating for UFO researchers. While there are multiple credible witnesses, airmen trained to be good observers and remain calm under extreme circumstances, the discrepancies between their stories are difficult to ignore. In the years that follow, researchers struggle to unravel the mystery. Then, in 2002, declassified government files reveal new facts about those mysterious nights in the woods.
And which could have been the spot where the alien craft landed.
Since 1983, the Rendlesham UFO incident has garnered attention around the world. But to this day, there is still no explanation for what U.S. Air Force personnel claimed they saw in the woods and skies of Suffolk, England. Some experts who have reviewed the reports of strange lights and a glowing spacecraft have concluded that these sightings are a simple case of optical illusion. Retired Air Force Major and astronomer James McGahey learned about the incident by chance.
I first heard about the Rendlesham Forest case in 1983 when I was at the base conducting a military exercise there on temporary duty.
During his tour, he discovers that 5 miles from the twin bases, on the shores of the North Sea, sits the Orford Ness Lighthouse. McGahey feels that witnesses mistook this lighthouse for a UFO.
If you're out in a dark sky on a cold night in December, and a lighthouse is swinging through the trees with this bright beam of light passing through the trees, it's going to have some strange, unusual effects. Light is going to get scattered by the trees.
John Burroughs did mention this lighthouse in his first statement to his superiors. In the report, he says that after the mysterious lights disappeared, he thought the lighthouse was another craft, but quickly realized his mistake.
I want to clarify something. This is always somebody tries to twist it. If you read the statement, especially mine, it clearly distinguishes between what we saw at the beginning and then we did see a beacon light and we followed it. Nowhere in my statement does it say I felt the beacon light was the object.
I've done a whole lot of research on this lighthouse. You know, you can talk about it from here to eternity. And there's absolutely no way that a lighthouse can travel 5 miles, go in and out of trees, shoot beams down to the ground. So anyway, it's not a lighthouse.
But McGahey claims there is a second explanation for the lights in the sky that has nothing to do with UFOs.
On the night of the 25th, at around 9:30 in the evening, a Cosmos satellite re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. It would have looked like a fireball, which is a very, very bright meteor.
For nearly 20 years, skeptics and believers continue their search for answers. In 2002, thanks in part to researchers like Georgina Bruni, the British government finally releases a new set of records. The files provide additional information about the case, but also raise new questions. They make it clear that the British government investigated the mysterious sightings back in 1981. This fact seems to indicate that military investigators did not believe the sightings were caused by a lighthouse or a satellite. But the files also reveal some of the shortcomings of that investigation.
We discovered that some of the radar facilities were actually faulty. The cameras were faulty on the nights in question, or allegedly faulty, that the films were missing.
At the time, investigators based their research on the original memo written by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. His document states that the first event occurred on December 27th, but the sightings actually began on the 25th. Halt's mistake has caused researchers to examine the wrong nights for 20 years. It is a frustrating revelation for Nick Pope, an official with the Ministry of Defense.
Here we had possibly the most significant UFO event ever to have taken place on British soil, and yet not only were the dates wrong, but crucial days had been lost.
Moreover, much has been left out of the files. Researchers hope the U.S. and British governments will release further information including pictures taken by Air Force personnel on the nights of the sightings. These are the only photographs that remain from the investigation. They show authorities examining the alleged landing site, but the pictures reveal no evidence of a landed craft. The U.S. Air Force's official stance is that the events were no threat to national security. To many, this statement doesn't ring true. If, in fact, nuclear weapons were housed at the base, then the military would have been very concerned about reports of an unidentified aircraft.
We had objects flying over the weapon storage area, shining beams down to the ground. If that ain't defense significance, what is?
Skeptics grapple with the same question, but in their minds, the military's response bolsters their claim that UFOs did not visit the Rendlesham Forest.
This was during the Cold War. You have to realize that security was fairly tight. Anything that would happen near the flight line when you have these high-value asset aircraft, tactical aircraft, or in weapons areas would immediately cause a response by the entire base. Everybody on the base would have been woken up and been reacting to something like that. And of course that didn't happen.
Even Charles Holt, the deputy base commander, is frustrated with his search for answers.
I kept prodding Squadron Leader Moreland, the British liaison officer, for an answer. Doesn't somebody care? Isn't somebody interested? I got the feeling that I was kind of left hanging out there to dry, if you know what I mean.
Though they continue to press the government for more information, some researchers believe that the missing files and early mistakes in the military investigation may leave the Rendlesham case a lasting mystery.
In any investigation, whatever you're investigating, if you don't really use the first 24 hours to try and chase it down, your chances of success diminish rapidly. The problem with the Rendlesham incident is that this happened over the Christmas period. A lot of the key personnel were on leave, and I think there was a bit of a decision-making vacuum.
The newly released information is not enough for the men involved at Rendlesham to put the incident to rest. For now, they possess the few pieces of intriguing evidence that remain from their strange encounter. Peniston's plaster casts and drawings. Holt's tape recording.
We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm.
Jim Peniston, Larry Warren, and John Burroughs continue to wonder why the government is hiding the truth.
There's a chain of command, there's a chain of custody, everything's kept track of. And for this stuff to play it like it disappeared and it's gone, it's not.
I guess technically we were part of a cover-up to ourselves. We probably started it by sanitizing it, the initial report.
Like John Lennon used to say, conspiracy is silence speaks louder than words, and that's a fact. And I'll be pissing off people as long as I can about this and screaming that this went down. Take a look at it, then judge for yourself.
In America, everyone's heard of Roswell, but only the UFO researchers really know about this case, and yet, in many ways, I consider this case to be bigger than Roswell. This could be the biggest UFO incident of all time. Let's put it where it deserves to be. Let's put it in people's minds.
People keep telling me, well, what really happened? I don't know. What was it? I really don't know. I mean, I don't.
Which is exactly what happened.
For the first time, the MOD files show how this extraordinary incident sparked a full-scale investigation conducted by aircraft near-miss investigator Anthony Booth.
Well, it was unusual for a start because it was the only one in my memory in 7 years of working in that particular department that I'd actually dealt with something like this. We could talk to the pilots, both the pilots. We would go through looking at radar recordings, RT transcript recordings of the voices of the pilots, recordings of what Manchester Air Traffic Control had to say. We just looked at anything that might shed some light on what this object might have been.
The pilots now refuse to talk publicly about the near crash, but the MOD files recall what they told Anthony Booth at the time.
My attention was initially focused on the glare shield in front of me, but I was diverted by something in my peripheral vision. The object had a number of small white lights, rather like a Christmas tree. The high speed of the object, although unable to estimate its distance, it was very close. There's a transcript of the conversation between the captain of the 737 and ground control.
So this is Speedbird 5061. We just had something go down the right-hand side, just above us, very fast.
And Manchester immediately come back and say, well, there's nothing seen on radar.
Was it an aircraft? Well, it had lights. He went down the starboard side very quickly.
Manchester say, and just above you?
Just slightly above us, yes.
Manchester then advised them to keep an eye out for anything, but they can't see anything at all. It must have been very fast.
So we'll go down very quickly after it passed you, I think. Okay, well, there you go.
The Manchester control tower could not find any radar signal. To radar expert Doug Robb, this is extraordinary.
It says the likelihood of such activity escaping detection is remote, as the area is well served by several radars, and any movement at the levels in question would almost certainly have generated a radar response. Nothing was seen.
So what was it that avoided radar detection? The MOD files showed that the investigators and pilots considered all the possibilities.
It was a hang glider. At night, he's suicidal.
Hang glider would not be picked up by normal radar, no.
A comet? No, I don't think so.
A meteor could be detected on re-entry if the radar was looking exactly in the right direction as that piece of debris went past at some speed.
Military? Maybe, but I didn't recognise it. But we're near a major airport. It would have shown up on the radar response. Spy plane? I don't think so. Didn't look like a stealth.
Stealth aircraft would not be picked up by normal radars. If a spy plane is being kept secret, it's not going to be flying where people can see it. And certainly nowhere near airliners.
UFO? That'd be daft.
To this day, the inhabitants of planet Earth have looked to the stars for proof of other life. But the truth isn't out there, it's in here. Since World War II, the British government has been watching us, watching the skies. Buried in the vaults of the Ministry of Defence are thousands of reports on UFO sightings, some left unexplained. But now, after decades of secrecy, the files are being released. And for the first time, the truth about Britain's UFOs is revealed. A near mid-air collision.
I can't speculate on what it was, I really can't. I mean, I don't know to this day what it was.
A World War II bomber's close encounter.
I don't talk about it too much to people, only close friends.
An unidentified object caught on radar. And new evidence on one of the most celebrated UFO cases, the Welsh Roswell.
If it could be shown that any UFOs were extraterrestrial in origin, people's entire belief system would fundamentally change.
Strange, unexplained stories that leave many wondering if there really is life out there. What are three popular word searches on the internet? Perhaps the first two are no surprise. UFOs have an incredible hold on the popular hits of a Boeing 737 carrying 60 passengers from Milan to Manchester report a near collision. It's an incredible sighting of an unidentified flying object which sends the authorities into a spin.
In the defence files, there are quite a number of incidents involving near misses between civil aircraft and unidentified flying objects. The most impressive of all was a report that was made by the crew of a British Airways 737.
Speedbird 5061, overhead pylons 9 miles.
They were just about to enter this cloud bank, quite a clear sky, good sort of vision. Suddenly the first officer said he saw this object coming towards him like an illuminated Christmas tree. It was so low in its approach and so close that he automatically ducked, thinking there was going to be a collision. This thing just zoomed past, and immediately he turned to the captain and said, "Did you see that?" The captain said, "Yeah, I saw it as well."
Immediately the pilots radioed into Manchester Control Tower.
There's a lot of concern amongst air crews about what damage could be done to their reputation if they became known as, the crew that see flying saucers. So it was interesting in this case that despite that, these two air crew decided that when they landed they were going to file an official air miss report. So that would then trigger a full detailed investigation by the Civil Aviation Authority.
Imagination. But few myths have involved government investigations, surveillance and cover-ups. UFOs have. One person who knows just how seriously UFO sightings have been taken by the British authorities is ex-MOD operative Nick Pope.
From 1952 onwards, it was decided that there really needed to be a small unit set up permanently to research and investigate the UFO phenomenon. And really from the 50s right up until 2009, the Ministry of Defence did have a small project looking at the UFO mystery.
Pope and the UFO desk in the 90s, helping add to the thousands of files the ministry had gathered for decades.
Subject making his way.
Now that they're being released from the vaults, key UFO eyewitnesses give their side of the stories. And UFO experts, skeptics and believers interrogate just what the MOD was keeping secret. Dr. David Clark is the journalist who helped first persuade the MOD to release the files.
If you look in the files, there are thousands of unusual things that people in the sky from right across the British Isles. There's absolutely no doubt that people see things in the sky that they can't identify. They always have done.
January 6th, 1995. Two experienced pilots